Hi, I'm Heather Stain, Senior Strategy Consultant for Delta Think and Director for the Charleston Library Conference. I'm here today with Jay Flynn, Executive Vice President and General Manager for Research for Wiley. Um, Thanks for joining us today, Jay.
Hi, Heather. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
To start off, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up in publishing, and what you're doing in your current role.
Sure, great. So in my current role, I lead the research division at Wiley. So the part of the business that looks after our journal publishing as well as our new partner solutions division. But I sort of grew up in publishing. I started my career in A&I databases back when those were delivered on CD-ROM, and worked to put some of those products on the internet, and then moved to product and sales roles. I worked at Elsevier for a stint on the Science Direct launch and was an account manager there. And then I went to Wolters Kluwer and did some work in clinical decision support. Had a stint at Cengage Learning where I did digital product management for Gale. And I was a publisher of major reference works at Gale. But for the last 12 years or so, I've been at Wiley in a variety of different jobs, most recently this one.
Thank you so much. Now, this is going to be your first Charleston conference, 2023.
Yes.
How have you heard 2022? Well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. What have you heard about the conference, and what are you most looking forward to?
I have heard great things about the conference. I sort of, dating myself here, remember some of the early topics and discussions that were put on the table by people like Karen Hunter back in the day, the Ann Okersons, the folks who really brought publishers, librarians, the vendor community together to have in-depth conversations that were slightly different than the ones you might have at ALA or the ones that you might have face-to-face, one-on-one. I've always been a big fan. A little story of when I got my first job at Wiley back in 2010. It was a kind of feast or famine thing, and that the Charleston Product Awards had just come out, and a product that I had created in my prior job had won Best New Product. And the product that I was inheriting and taking over, Wiley Online Library, had won the unfortunate Lemon of the Year product. So my first job was to sort of come and take some of the learning that I had developed at Cengage at Gale and bring that to the online library program at Wiley and try and make that a better user experience and a better experience for librarians. So yeah, I'm a big fan. I did your podcast a while back, which was great, and I'm looking forward to the event.
Fantastic. Well, we're looking forward to having you there. Now, in preparing for this interview, I know you mentioned that your fondness for libraries, goes way back. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, it does. I'm a huge fan of libraries, and it does go way back to maybe sort of the classic story of summer reading program and the first times that it was my experience with the public library, really, and the school library. This notion of serendipity, discovery, of being the kind of kid who really found himself at home in the stacks. And I was a voracious reader as a child, and probably to my social detriment, but I really took to libraries, and I was on a first name basis with my public librarian, and it was the kind of thing that was really formative for me. Fast forwarding, when I started working in publishing and started going and talking to academic librarians, and then in my job at Cengage, where I was out talking to school librarians, I had a chance at Ovid when I worked at Kluwer to talk to medical librarians. So I've been a member of various library associations and spoken at a lot of library conferences. Probably one of the most gratifying things about my current job is that it is of incredible personal, almost relief to me, and I say that advisedly, right? But it is really important to me that Wiley and other publishers are getting on the same page as libraries where open access is concerned. And I feel no small amount of kind of personal pride in being part of a transformation of an industry and helping hopefully to lead that transformation from subscription to open access. And I feel like that can only mean good things for our relationships, publishers, libraries, funders, et cetera.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back and talk about that a little bit more, but I want to delve a little bit more into your perceptions of the library space, given the variation and the different roles and the touch points that you have. How would you see, as a publisher and someone from that space, the librarianship, kind of as a profession evolving and changing over the time that you've been in the industry?
It's a great question. So when I started selling to libraries and talking to them about, there's this newfangled thing called the internet. It's the successor to Arlen and some of the interlibrary loan things. Let's put A&I databases on the web and start making them available 24/7. Let's start putting journals on the web and making them available 24/7. It was much more of a technical services conversation. It was about cataloging. It was about Z3950. It was about MARC records in a way that I feel like it's much less about today. I feel like today it's about strategy. It's about serving, and it's always been, the library's always been like a central and incredibly crucial part of teaching and learning in the academic space. One of the things that I think is so interesting about the transition to OA is how as we take down barriers to access and even simple things like on-campus and off-campus use. We move away from some of those old technologies like Shibboleth and Easy Proxy that were used to kind of gate access to content. We're freed up to have more interesting conversations. And as the profession has evolved, one of the things that I'm really excited about is the fact that this is a moment for us to rethink certain things, rethink the importance of, for example, on-platform search. Wiley spends a lot of money every year making sure the search functionality on its platform and via our Ad-upon business, the search platforms of many, many, many other publishers, is to a certain standard. And yet every year, the amount of on-platform search that happens goes down. When I was selling, I had to talk a lot about Boolean logic and on-platform search. I don't hear those questions anymore. So, as we continue to evolve from a product perspective to a more strategic conversation about open access, rights, institutional repositories, those things, it to me, it feels like a real design moment, a moment where we can have important conversations about the future of scholarly communications, the role of the library, the funder, the author, and the publisher.
Yeah. So, let's get back to the future of OA. You've mentioned it a couple of times. I know that it's something that is important to you, and as you say, kind of gratifying to be in the space where you are, at this time. Tell us a little bit more about how Wiley views the centrality of OA, and also, like, are there unintended consequences that concern you?
There are a few unintended consequences that concern me, but I think in the main, it's a good, right? I think we have a lot of data that say that content that's open gets cited more, content that's open gets read more. There's a clear sense that, and we see this with the Nelson memo, that access to taxpayer-funded research in the form of the version of record and in the form of peer-reviewed scholarship is a really important aspect of the overall research landscape and the overall strategy. It's good for reproducibility. It's good for traceability of methods. It's good for scientific integrity. It's good for any number of reasons. So it's good for funders, good for authors, good for libraries, good for publishers. And at Wiley, we're very much embracing that, right? Our commitment is to transition our business to open access as fast as we can and as fast as the customers want us to. So that's what we're doing. And, we'll finish this year somewhere north of a third, maybe even approaching half of our content being in our front list being available open. So, that's a massive shift for a company like mine. And it's in my opinion, a really good thing. If there are unintended consequences, some of the things I worry about include accessibility to publishing services, in particular in the Global South. Now, at Wiley, we're doing transitional agreements and we've signed a number of deals in the Global South, but there is a sense that well-funded labs, well-funded universities are going to find a way to participate in the open access publishing world. And they're going to find ways to do that more easily than institutions that maybe aren't as research intensive. Or if you're a researcher who's earlier in your career, maybe you don't have the funding to do that. So I think that's why transitional agreements are so important. And it's why alignment between the funders and the libraries and the publishers is so important. It's also a major administrative burden in a lot of places for libraries. And I mentioned to you in our conversation earlier that I had a discussion with a Russell Group librarian out of the UK who's had to hire 14 staff to handle the administrative side of author validation, compliance, deposit mandates, but primarily just the transitional agreement administration itself. And does this author work at my institution? Do they have are we matching the grant requirement with the open access requirement? How are we handling all this? There's a lot of work associated with the transition, and that work I think needs to be scoped and thought about in ways that make it scalable. So we've got products and services in the market for libraries that will help, like our OABLE platform. But regardless of if you buy a service from us or if you get it from anywhere else, I think that administrative question for libraries will be big. And then the last one is just the sense that I have about what publishers who aren't as big as Wiley and learned societies need to do to transition their businesses. I know that we have spent literally tens of millions of dollars on infrastructure, on technology, on people, on legal services, everything else, to rewrite our sales contracts, to prep our teams on how to have these conversations, to build the infrastructure to move from a subscription to a gold open access or an APC business model. We've got the resources to do that, but many, many, many smaller publishers and societies don't. In part, that's one of the main reasons we started our partner services division the partner solutions division is to make sure that other publishers have access to this technology and to these capabilities. But I don't see the market coalescing. I don't see libraries coalescing around a single business model anytime soon. I think what we see in Australia is different than what we see in Japan or Korea. What we see in Japan and Korea is different than what I'm hearing that the JISC wants to do in the UK, which is certainly different than what Project Deal is doing. To say nothing of the multi-payer approach out of California versus the approach MIT wants to take. So the market for transitional agreements even, and the way that works is definitely expanding rather than contracting. It's putting a lot of pressure on a lot of different players in the ecosystem: funders, publishers, authors.
Yeah, so you've mentioned Adapon, the Adapon division of Wiley. You mentioned OABLE, which was a recent acquisition, and I think it's clear that you and your team are interested in the entirety of the research, life cycle. Can you tell us a little bit more, about some of the companies that have been brought in, and how you look at kind of integrating them to make this research life cycle maybe more efficient or less painful for authors?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I spent a lot of time in product management in my publishing career, and that identification of what we call pain points has been a huge priority for us. So I talked a bit about the compliance side and the requirements on especially societies and publishers, some of the impacts on libraries that we're observing in the market. But taking a step back, the single most important thing that's happening for a scientific publisher or a society right now is the transition to open access. There's nothing else more important than that. It is the biggest motivator and mover inside my business today, and I'm 100% sure I can fairly represent that across the rest of my peer companies and colleagues in the industry. So that brings with it, especially for not-for-profits, it brings with it a tremendous amount of sort of existential pressure. The other thing, of course, we're seeing is that COVID has had an impact on, for example, the in-person meeting, which is another way societies have continued to drive membership and drive revenue, frankly. So they're under a lot of pressure. And so we looked at all that and we said, okay, as the world's largest society publisher, what's our role and our obligation is it to sort of defend the legacy model, or is it to embrace the transition to OA and then help others cross that chasm? And then once we get there, what can we do to create a sustainable future for folks that is no longer dependent on subscription revenues and the legacy business models, which have caused so much tension between publishers and libraries in the past. So we went out and we sort of put together this dream team of companies and staff, editorial services, submission system work on Adipon, obviously, in the technology. We acquired Hindawi that came with a new peer review system, and we're building a sort of end-to-end infrastructure for publishing that takes into account APC management, takes into account faster submission and peer review. It brings modern technology to the space. As an aside, most of the technology that's used today to submit and peer review articles is 20, 25 years old. It really needs an upgrade. It needs a generational upgrade. It's probably long overdue. And so we're building new systems to help do that, and then bringing AI tools into play to make sure that we have the publishing integrity angle covered, because that's another unintended consequence, I think, of some of the OA transition, is that there are new and emerging publishing integrity threats out there, and we want to be sure that we're building tools that are fit for purpose to handle that. So it's really about just bringing people together to try and reinvent the infrastructure that we need to support the open science era. And if that sounds like a big project, it is, but we're excited about it.
Great. And you mentioned accessibility in terms of global accessibility, but accessibility to folks who need special affordances is something that's really important to me. And I was excited when I learned the Inera acquisition, was going to kind of be looking at accessibility, in a comprehensive way. So kudos on that.
Thank you. It's a major focus. We just actually had a Wiley UX, Pan Wiley user experience meeting with all of our UXers and our design teams just last month, where the focus was 100% on accessibility. And there are all kinds of opportunities for us to really raise our game there. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, I want to talk about early careers. When we planned for this interview, you talked about your interaction with early careers, both in the publishing environment, but also in the library space. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of advice you give? What's more general, what might be more specific? So when I was living and working in Michigan, I had an opportunity to come talk to the School of Information, both at University of Michigan and at Wayne State once a year. And I would talk to the intro to reference classes, sort of intro to librarianship classes. And I also had a chance back a long, long time ago to spend a lot of time at the library school at Drexel University as well. And one of the things that I would say to library students and early career librarians who are going back to maybe get an advanced degree was, spend some, you're in these great institutions, right? You're in these amazing institutions. Take advantage, audit a class in marketing, audit a class in basic accounting. If your aspiration is to run a library someday, don't take for granted the administrative, sales and marketing, budgeting skill set that you're going to need to run these institutions. These are incredibly important, incredibly big institutions that have big budgets and need to prove to their stakeholders the value that they're delivering. And one way you do that is through effective communication. The other way you do that is through knowing your numbers and providing a sort of return on investment for your stakeholders, whoever they might be. If it's
the provost or the research office, or if it's faculty, students, et cetera. In the publishing side of things, in my day job, the advice is kind of similar. It's about, if you're an early career person in publishing, I think you need to make a choice pretty early. Do you want to be a generalist, or do you want to work inside your vertical function? Do you want to run editorial one day, or would you like to run a business? And if your career is in sort of more of a function, then the most important thing you can do is build your network in that function, try to move from subject discipline to subject discipline, expand your global research, global reach, et cetera. But one of the great things about scholarly communications is that it's a global endeavor, right? So it's super fun to do that. If you want to be a generalist, it's really important to make lots of lateral moves and work in marketing and do a stint in editorial, and then do a stint in technology, and then do a stint in sales, and learn what each of those jobs is about. Don't be afraid of that lateral move. Don't always look at the next title or the next promotion, but really think about how do you broaden out your resume, your CV, and increase your skill set to make it more of a generalist skill set. General managers have to be generally informed about all the different functions in the business they represent.
I think that's great advice that most of us should take heed of. I want to pick up on something you said in an earlier response about now being a kind of a design moment, because I think it's really important. There may be folks who just feel we're in uncertain or, kind of perilous times. There's lots of changes. How are you looking at that design moment?
It is really important. I think this is the personal opinion, might not necessarily stand the test of time, but I think we're going to look back at this moment that we're in as a moment that was way bigger than print to digital. And I went through print to digital, right? I was part of that group of people on the publishing side who migrated from print subscriptions to digital subscriptions and stood up those early platforms that started to deliver content 24/7. And for those of you who are old enough to remember this, took it out of the library stack and put it on the desktops of every member of the university community. This feels to me like it's way bigger than that, because it goes to really essential questions about the roles that all of us play in this endeavor. What's the role of the journal going forward in an age of zero embargo green? What's the role of a journal going forward in an age of institutional repositories? What's the role of a library in a world where you're not building collections anymore if access is open, right? Fast forward 5 years from now, if subscriptions have gone away and we're no longer doing subscription management, what's the importance of some of these legacy ideas that we've held on to? A chief one among them, I would say, is we have to reconsider this question of anonymity. And I know that is a hard one, Heather, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to kind of talk about why I think that's true based on my experience with doing a lot of these big transitional agreements. Because I know it's coming back to, I love librarianship. I love libraries. I'm a huge defender of the right to read. And I get emotional when I think about the role that the ALA has played and the role that public librarians all over the United States have played in defending people's right to read. So I want to be really clear about what I mean by that. But if it's all right, I mean, it just feels like that's a big one for me in terms of this design moment.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us more?
Well, we've never treated author data, author information, reader information like data to be mastered, managed, corrected, fixed, et cetera. We've always treated it as just text. So what I mean by this, and the librarians and the information scientists in the audience will understand if I nerd out a minute, but it's never been metadata and managed like metadata. It's always been managed like text. And so for years and years and years, we've had scads of data. At Wiley, we get a new submission about every 35 seconds, right? And so we've had all this data coming into our system that we've never managed or mastered, and there wasn't really ever a need for it. Similarly, IP access has always been a thing that was obviated the need for users to register on the reading side. And if I focus on that authorship side for just a second, one of the major requirements that publishers face, and small societies, not-for-profits, big publishers, small publishers face, is this idea that we've got to be able to tell a variety of stakeholders who this author is, where they work, what requirements their funder has placed on them about IR deposit or what kind of license they can sign, what kind of CC license they can sign. Are there multiple payers? Is there one payer? Where do they work? Whose auspices do they work under? We need to identify the author in order to do that. And that sounds trivial, but if you've never done it before, and you ask, well, why has Wiley spent tens of millions of dollars on the open access transition? It's because we need to identify and then report back to a huge number of people in the ecosystem who these authors are and what constraints and responsibilities and requirements and funding they have in order to publish OA. Getting that right today, if it's using ORCID or if it's using other bits of common infrastructure, and I do think there need to be common standard, getting that right is a major design moment for the industry. And I want to do that in a way that involves all of the folks we just talked about, and understands the researcher need, understands the funder and the payer need, understands the library need, and then does it in the context of the global requirements, which, as I talked about before, are really different depending on which country you work in. So that's just one example of a really big challenge that is going to cost money, and it's going to require us to think differently about things like personal data.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think, as we move into this OA world, and certainly, a lot of the folks that we talk to at Delta think we're having these conversations every day. The definition of what is your return on investment is changing. The reporting requirements go up, for compliance and just for payment structures, and the like. And I know that Wiley is a big believer in participating in industry collaborations, in key staff volunteering their time to working groups and committees. So I mean, is there an additional nudge you would give to if someone's listening to this from an organization that maybe doesn't necessarily see the value of staff time, going to these types of initiatives, or somebody who wants to get involved in it? Is there any advice you would give?
Yes, I would say, please participate. I mean, I think, first of all, we need a diversity of inputs. If it's just the big publishers volunteering staff time to work on a project with NISO, or a project with OSTP to set standards, then it's only the big publishers' viewpoints are going to be represented. If it's just the US publishers that are doing it, it's only the US viewpoints that are going to be represented. If learned societies, who really do have different needs around data management, different needs around archiving, the needs of a chemist taking data off a mass spec machine and the deposit requirements they need for that are really different than the needs of an oceanographer taking data out of a bunch of ocean buoys. And the differences that and the knowledge and the expertise that societies bring to the table in all of this can't be overstated. Wiley can convene societies because we have a lot of them, in our family of partners, but there are major players out there who I think need to have a voice at the table. And so I would really encourage people to do that. The other thing is, it's a great development opportunity for your staff. And to come back to a point about advice I would give early career folks, in getting involved in these kind of things is a really great way to grow your network.
Great. I'm a huge believer in that. So thanks for that. Just to finish off the interview today, you've mentioned AI. You've mentioned certainly, open access, like data, treating author information as data as it should be. And if we think 5 years out, or maybe even further on the horizon, are there things that you kind of have in the back of your mind that you're excited about, that you're keeping an eye on, that you can share before we close?
Yes, I remember going to a conference on medical library information architecture back 2002, 2003, and talking about the way that publisher data needed to change to inform clinical decision support, and the importance of fielding the data, and the importance of adding value through things like semantic tagging and other things to really make journal content work in the context of doctors at the bedside, right? And the reason I start here is because the challenge that presented to the publisher I was working for at the time is a challenge I think we're right on the cusp of solving now. And it's been a kind of personal project and goal of mine for my entire publishing career. I was lucky enough to start publishing right at the sort of the birth of the commercial internet. And so I joined in digital in the mid 90s. And since then, the thing I've been waiting for is this moment where we use the power of the internet to write content for the medium of the internet, to create new artifacts of scholarly communication that go beyond the cover of the journal and the supplementary material into smart, linked, interoperable, reproducible, provable data sets that are accessible to everybody, so that we can make progress on the really important things that researchers are working on. And I think the publisher's responsibility there is to invest in those new artifacts in collaboration with the funders, the researchers themselves, and the societies that represent them, in a way that really unlocks additional value. It's time to move beyond the PDF as the artifact into an era where we've got data, we've got code, we've got methods, we've got author metadata and information, we've got the peer content itself and the write-up, we've got the figures, all treated as individual objects that are rich, semantically informed, downloadable, accessible to folks who need extra support. And that to me is a really, really, really exciting thing. When we get out of writing for the PDF medium and get into writing for the medium of the web, which I feel like we're really, really close to right now, that's the thing I get most excited about. AI has a big role to play in that, but it's also about it's about what, again, as a design moment comment, what this moment gives us a chance to focus on as we move from subscription to OA.
Well, as a researcher and a historian myself, I'm really excited to be on the cusp of that future, and I can't wait to see what it brings for you and the projects that you're working on. So I'll thank you again for joining us today. I hope that you had a great time, and look forward to continue the conversation.
Great. Looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Take care, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.